Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing well. Today I want to talk a bit about the effective range of the 545. This is actually a video I've wanted to do for a while, and I just kind of felt like I didn't have enough data backing it up, and even now I feel like I could have more, but I could keep saying that forever and never get around to it. So I think I have enough now. So let's get into it. So first off, although this video is titled Effective Range of the 545 Bullet, and while that is what I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to be referring to it as the lethal range in this video here, because although maximum effective range is the correct definition of what I'm talking about, I've noticed there's just so many people who use that term and are referring to other things when they're saying it. So since that term has kind of been a little bit muddied in its definition, that's why I'm going to be using the term lethal range. That is what this video is going to be about, and by lethal range, I'm defining that specifically as the range at which the round will kill the target, whatever that target might be, whether you're hunting or whether you're in a self-defense situation. Granted, I'm not sure what type of self-defense situation you have to be in where you're worried about if your bullet will even be lethal at that range, but hopefully you get my point. I just mean that in pretty much any situation that you might be in, if the bullet will be effective at that point. And that is assuming a well-placed shot. Obviously, it's not going to be lethal even with the best round if you have terrible shot placement. So, with that out of the way, I can actually start talking about the performance of the 545. So first off, I've tested every round that I will be talking about today inside of ballistic gelatin. However, I have not tested it at long ranges, which is kind of what I'm going to be focusing on in this video. And the reason for that is because through my rifle, the SLR-104FR, using my most accurate ammunition, which is Barnall 60 grain FMJ, which I think counts as a match ammo, but even then my MOA is approximately 3.5, give or take a little bit. So the furthest I've actually shot is 525 yards. If I stretch that out to, let's just say 600, then that would be a 22-inch spread if I round it up ever so slightly. So I would have to be really lucky to be able to hit ballistic gel at that range, and furthermore, you might say, well, I could just shoot like 100 rounds because eventually one would hit, and while that is true, it's way more likely I would get another round that hits it very poorly before that, and then it would skew all the results because I would have another wound channel going through the gel, and it would skew the actual proper bullet, assuming I ever had one that it was truly like perfectly in the center of that ballistic gel. So that's just the reason for that. And I'm just using MOA because I used an online calculator a while ago to calculate this, and that's just what the results were given in. So in the future I'm probably going to switch to mil radians because those are a lot more straightforward to calculate. But moving on, a big part of this accuracy, I mean, it's decent, but I would say a lack thereof of accuracy, especially at these ranges. This is more of an issue with the ammunition itself. It's not inherent to the AK platform. Now granted, the AK isn't a precision rifle, but the biggest limiting factor, aside from myself, the shooter, because that's always the largest limiting factor on a gun, but aside from that, the ammunition. Although, as I was mentioning before, yes, the Barnall 60 grain FMJ that I'm shooting is considered to be more of a match or shooting range type of more accurate bullet, it's still not accurate at all in comparison to some of the extremely high quality ammunition you can get for other calibers, for example 5.56, or that someone could hand load for those same calibers. But I do want to talk about that, and I will talk about it more later. But moving on, another point I wanted to mention when considering the lethal range of the 5.45 is it really depends on what kind of ammunition you're using. You know, this would be the case with pretty much every ammo, regardless of whether it was 5.45 or 5.56 or anything. But a big difference with 5.45 especially is that most of the civilian, if not all of the civilian 5.45 ammunition that you can get, does not contain the air pocket in the tip of the bullet, unlike most of the military 5.45. I own a little bit of military surplus ammunition from Lugansk, which I think actually may contain it, though I'm not sure, because it performs extremely similarly in ballistic gelatin to 7 and 6, in fact, like almost identically. I might try to cut open a bullet in the future to see, however, that is extremely difficult to actually perform and not massacre the bullet in the process. And I have a really, really limited supply of that type of ammo now. It's used to be easier to find, but not anymore, so I really want to reserve it as much as possible. But going back to what I was saying, specifically about most civilian ammunition not containing the air pocket, take the Barnall 60 grain FMJ that I've been referring to a bunch in this recording so far. That is one that I'm pretty sure does not contain it. So it won't perform as well as it should when compared to what you would expect to see from a typical 5.45 round. So that could and would further limit its lethal range. However, I am going to keep going back to this Barnall 60 grain because it's what I have the most of, and it's the most kind of average, most accurate ammo that I have. So, moving on with that, the energy at different ranges. This is a pretty big factor in how powerful the bullet is, but it is not everything, and I'm going to talk about that more later. Just for a few kind of benchmarks, at 500 yards, the Barnall 60 grain FMJ that I'm using has about 419 foot-pounds of energy, and again, this is all calculated from the same online calculator that I was mentioning earlier, which I will link in the description and probably on the screen as well. So 419 foot-pounds of energy, that is similar to a 9mm at the muzzle. At 600 yards, we drop down to 346 foot-pounds, 700 yards is 285 foot-pounds, and at 800, we're looking at 235 foot-pounds, which is a little bit more powerful than a 22 long rifle at the muzzle. And it really depends on which type of 22 long rifle you'd be using or comparing it to, but approximately there, and then just a little bit more powerful than that. And also the velocities here are quite good, and it only becomes subsonic once it reaches 1000. A caveat there, of course, is that it has already gone through the transonic zone, which is when it would destabilize quite a bit, which is around 800 probably, when you could start seeing it enter that zone, maybe even 750, but for sure around 800 it would start to destabilize. However, now I actually am going to get into this. Like I was saying earlier, energy, just the foot-pounds or the joules of energy, is not everything. All the ballistic equations that I'm aware of kind of focus a lot on the energy and on expansion of the bullet, so like with hollow points, but they don't really account for tumbling or yaw, and tumbling especially is what's supposed to give the 5.45 most of its lethality. I'm not going to talk about these equations much more other than what I just did, because there is no need to go down that rabbit hole for this video. It is more tangential than anything, but just be aware that that's not really accounted for in those equations. That means it's pretty much impossible to quantify the effectiveness of the 5.45 perfectly. So going off of equations like that, and also from the energy and stuff like that, the lethal range would probably only be a couple hundred meters, but from what I've experienced in my own testing and from some other comments I've received in some of my long-range AK shooting videos mentioning the lethality of the 5.45 at very long ranges, the 5.45 is very likely to be lethal at least out to 700 meters. Again, you got to really consider what type of ammunition you're using and all of that, but probably about 700 meters is what I would think, or 765 yards if I convert that to the imperial system. Depending on your ammo, 700 yards also might even be a bit of a stretch for my Barnall 60 grain included, because as I was mentioning earlier, shot placement is a big part of it, and you can't place a good shot if you can't even accurately do so at that range. And back at 600 yards, I already had about a 21-inch group, which is already slightly larger than a torso-sized target, so that is another thing to keep in mind when I'm saying the 700 yards. So I could definitely see a good case being made for someone to say that the lethal range is only 600, but I think it could go kind of either way depending on your ammo and your specific rifle, if it's maybe slightly more accurate or less accurate. But when defining a maximum lethal range, I think 700 is a pretty decent upper limit sort of estimate, as I'm kind of trying to make in this video, hence why I'm settling on that number more so than others. So making assumptions about the lethality of the round based purely on the muzzle velocity or the joules or foot-pounds, as I was mentioning earlier, of energy delivered on the target, while that is absolutely a large factor, it is absolutely not the entire picture, because you need to account for the yaw, the tumbling, or the expansion if you're using a hollow point, which granted, some of these equations, most of these equations do account for expansion of the bullet, but I have yet to see one that accounts for tumbling. And also, to go off on a little bit of a side thing right here, I have not forgotten about body armor. If you account for body armor of at least NIJ level 3 or higher, which is what's rated for 545, 556, 762 by 39 and all of that, you pretty much don't have a lethal range with this round, or any of those other rounds I just mentioned either. But I just kind of wanted to mention that because I feel like there would probably be someone in the comments who would say like, yeah, but what about body armor? It's like, that's kind of beside the point at the moment, because yes, it exists. It kind of negates everything I'm talking about here. So, one other thing I wanted to say about the lethal range and why I'm saying it's probably about 700 is because, again, at least with my rifle being approximately 3.5 MOA with this ammunition, the group size, if you can even call it a group at this point, if I were to go out to 700 yards, would be 25.7 inches, which is larger than a torso-sized target. So at that point, you can't really have good shot placement, so it wouldn't be lethal at that point. And that is a pretty big limiting factor of the 545 when compared to the 556. I can hand load rounds on the 556 to get them very accurate. However, I can't really do that on the 545, and there's actually a few reasons for that. The first is that they use burden primers, which are really hard to get out. Second is steel cases are, well, you can get around hand-loading steel cases. It's not impossible, but both of those combined is already getting pretty difficult. But the third is that I can't even find burden primers, at least here in the United States, and probably for most of you watching in Europe, I suspect that's most likely going to be the case too, but let me know if I'm wrong on that. So especially, more than anything, those burden primers, the only other option would be to go with brass-cased ammunition for the 545 here, and the only type that I can readily get here is the Hornady, which is trash. And also, even if it wasn't bad ammo, and I actually did trust it to not slam fire every time I closed the bolt, it's just ejected with so much force that your brass cases get destroyed after being ejected the first time anyway. So in closing, yeah, I would say probably around 700 meters is probably the lethal range of the 545. If I'm wrong about anything, or if you disagree on that, then feel free to leave a comment and mention it. I would love to hear it. I'm okay with being wrong. Feel free to point that out if I am. Just don't be an ass. I've seen way too many videos about 545, or really just about calibers in general, where people go crazy and there's like weird caliber internet wars. But otherwise, thanks for watching. Hopefully you found this video informative, and I will see you all next time.